Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Spin Cycle, the show for reviews of newer albums as well as older albums when I feel like it. And today, I definitely feel like it. Normally I do newer albums just because it's something I think, obviously people want to, hear the newer music, especially from established bands, to kind of see how their sound has changed. Whereas today I'm going to be talking about a band whose sound has definitely changed, but this is what I consider to be one of their best albums. In fact, I'll play my hand right now. This is my favorite album of theirs. And today I'm going to be talking about Arch Enemy's Rise of the Tyrant, which came out in 2007. So I'm not talking about a classic album in that sense, but I am talking about something that is certainly an older album and was a high point, in my opinion, for the band particularly. But let's just kind of talk about the background going into that album. So if you don't know who Arch Enemy is, I'm sorry. If you do know who they are and you don't like them, then I'm also sorry. But I'm also not sorry because this is just a fantastic band, and they always have been, even though they've gone through various shifts over the years. When they formed, they formed as a supergroup in 1996, which was kind of a big deal for death in the death metal world. And since then, they've been one of the most prolific melodic death metal bands in the world. In 2000, though, they saw a fundamental shift in who they were as a band when Angela Gossow became their lead singer. Angela Gossow is my hero. She's one of my favorite artists in the world, and so she's what hooked me into Arch Enemy. Not just Christopher Ammett and Michael Ammett's music, but her singing, her female growling was just so amazing and so captivating to me. She's one of the few who can do it, let alone pull it off well. She was previously in two other bands before joining Arch Enemy, and the story of how she joined Arch Enemy is an interesting one in itself. Basically, she was interviewing them, and she basically knew that they had some issues with their current lead singer, and so she played a demo for him and said it was kind of bad. She did a performance for him, and they just absolutely loved her sound, and she brought an amazing sound to Arch Enemy and gave us some absolutely fantastic albums, not the least of which is, of course, Rise of the Tyrant. So, and Angela Gossow found influence in a lot of death metal masters, Jeff Walker of Carcass, Chuck Schindler. She also got Dave Mustaine in there from Megadeth. So, she has quite a range, but her focus was mostly on that growling style of death metal. Prior to Rise of the Tyrant, Gossow had done 3 albums with the band. The first one, which was Wages of Sin, which actually saw also an improvement in the production of their music. So they went from a more raw sound, They went from a really raw sound to something a little bit more polished and produced, which obviously made it a little bit more easy to get some more support for it. After that came Anthems of Rebellion, which is a solid album, even though it didn't necessarily get a strong critical acclaim. And then Doomsday Machine, which had some criticism on its own, but was a solid album. And actually, Doomsday Machine is the first album that got me into Arch Enemy. By that point, I'd heard of them, I'd heard a couple songs, but it wasn't until I heard the song Nemesis and just that shredding riff to open up Nemesis that just got me into the band. So, and of course, her vocal style is so unique and so amazingly captivating that I just had to jump right in. But after Doomsday Machine, the band had a little bit of turmoil. So Christopher Ammett, who's one of the founding members of the band, had to leave the band for his own personal reasons. He had some issues that he had to deal with on his own. So with him leaving, they had kind of a little carousel of some other artists to come in, including one of the former guitarists of Opeth. And there was also a lot of criticism of where the band was. It sounded, people were criticizing them obviously because their sound had changed so much from the first albums, prior to Gossow's entrance into the band, as well as the idea that an album like Doomsday Machine was just pandering to this new wave of American heavy metal, which I don't necessarily see it. It certainly kind of fit in with those groups. When I first saw Arch Enemy, was on Ozfest in 2006, I want to say, or 2005. One of those, in that range. And, they were on the stage with bands like Bury Your Dead, Trivium, Killswitch Engage, As I Lay Dying, Soilwork. So there were a lot of, there was a good mix of bands, but a lot of the popular ones like Killswitch Engage, that was when Howard Jones was still in the band, or As I Lay Dying, those were the ones that were really drawing big crowd, or Mudvayne. I think Mudvayne was there too. So, well, there was a lot of criticism of how this band had kind of gotten away from their darker roots, um, which there might be some truth to that. So ultimately, they came out with Rise of the Tyrant, which wasn't necessarily a return to their darker roots, but it was a shift a little bit from the three previous albums that Gossau had worked on. Now, in the Rise of the Tyrant, they started putting it together. Christopher Ammett returned to the band, basically brothers reunited, and so the band was kind of basically ready to get back into this. Angela actually started to experiment with some different elements in her sound as well. On Anthems of Rebellion and Doomsday Machine, she had done some double vocal track to make it sound more like demonic and grisly and all that. But she decided on this one to do a single vocal track to make it sound raw and brutal and all that. And it paid off. It certainly did, because you can tell that the vocals on this album are a lot different than you would get on something like Doomsday Machine. And Michael Ammett actually had a really good statement about what he felt this album was. He basically said this was meant to be a statement from the band to all the people who were criticizing them, basically saying, we are still very much a melodic death metal band. We can still shred it. We still have that melody that made us famous, as well as the brutality of the death metal that we've been playing for so long. So Michael Ammett was firmly behind the direction that they went with this album. And it had some decent critical reviews, and at the time it was the highest opener, the highest Billboard chart for the band. It opened at 84 on the Billboard 200, which for a melodic death metal band out of Sweden, that's a pretty big deal. So it means there was a good fan response. But of course, by then, they were getting a little bit more worldwide renown at that point. This album, when we get into like the nuts and bolts of this album, it is just raw brutality that makes it so immediately appealing. The album opens up with a song that just starts to shred and starts to just like get inside your head, and it doesn't relent. There's a brief interlude later in the album, which you get commonly with a number of death metal bands, but that interlude does not detract from the sheer intensity that this album produces. It starts off strong, it doesn't relent. That's what I want from a band like Arch Enemy. And it's a good mix, though, of aggressive tracks and of melodies. So you have songs like In This Shallow Grave, which have some good mix of brutality and melody, or Blood Is on Your Hands, but then you'll get like Revolution Begins or The Day You Died. Some really good like combination of songs. As well as the lyrics themselves. The music is one thing. The music is just it's so powerful, but then the lyrics are in themselves very inspiring. You can tell they're coming from a place of anger, looking at the world around them and saying there are some severe anger issues in this album. You can definitely feel it. I mean, the name of the album is Rise of the Tyrant, and this is 2007 when we're talking about the height of some pretty severe world conflicts going on. So it was a political statement, but it was also a personal statement. Not to mention, you could tell, the band themselves were dealing with some personal stuff that they wanted to get out there. So, all right, the album itself. What are the highlights? What are the songs that are really memorable? Like I said, when the album opens, Blood Is on Your Hands is the first song out of the gate, and that one is just powerful. It just starts off and it just hits you with this, this like heavy riff, and then just Angela screaming. That's the way that an album should begin. Is it just like gets right in your face. You hear a growl, and you can tell the difference between something like right out of the gate. You can tell the difference between Rise of the Tyrant and Doomsday Machine, because her vocal is just like you can just hear her. You're not hearing her with this reverb. You're just hearing her, which was really, really awesome. And Blood Is on Your Hands is such a powerful, crushing track that it's just the best way to open an album. Then you have Revolution Begins, is another song that's kind of reminiscent of 80s metal. When I first heard it, I almost thought it was a cover of a Queensryche song because it just had that sort of sound to it. So it's not so much a death metal song, even though it has death metal vocals, but it certainly conveys a powerful message and is done so in a very strong sense. The Day You Died, this one was really interesting because it's a great song, but what's even more interesting about it is the source material that it came from. The Day You Died is inspired by the movie Grave of the Fireflies, and if you've never seen this movie, be warned before watching it because it's one of the saddest movies I've ever seen in my life. Even now when I think about that movie, it makes me queasy of just how painful that movie is to watch. Beautiful movie, but it is extremely painful movie to watch. And so, of course, to have a song like this with lyrics, The Day You Died, My Tears Ran Dry, is just kind of this, anthem of suffering and, of loss and all that. So, powerful song, but just an even mind-blowing inspiration. The album closes with the song Vultures, which is also one of my favorite songs on the album. Vultures it has a really cool, guitar opening, and then just goes right into, it doesn't end with just a slow song. It ends with, if you're getting hit by a freight train, this is the back locomotive of the freight train coming to run you over. So, it's just it is, the whole album from start to finish is just, to borrow from Slayer, it's repentless. Vulture's fantastic song. Night Falls Fast is another great one. That one is kind of this fun melodic anthem song. It's one you can imagine that at a concert, at a show, when they play this song, you just have the whole crowd, cheering, Night Falls Fast. It's just a great, kind of, crowd building song. I Will Live Again is probably the most single-worthy song. It probably was a single. I don't always know what the singles were off of albums, but this one definitely could have been one. It has that, sort of, it's accessible for people who might not be ready for the more vicious aspects of Arch Enemy, but it's also still strong enough to just fit right in with the timbre of the whole album. But my favorite track on the album has got to go to the titular track, Rise of the Tyrant. Not only, there are so many reasons why I absolutely love this song. The first of which is that the song opens with a sample from the movie Caligula, which basically starred Malcolm McDowell as Caligula. And this Caligula was this depraved tyrant, basically. And so for them to open up with a quote from that movie, and just the way it goes, as soon as that sample is done, they just go right into a riff, go right into Angela screaming, and just this. It's such a powerful song, and the riff is face peeling riff. It's so good. That's part of why this album it just gets in your head so quickly and so effectively. At this point, of all the Arch Enemy albums I've listened to listened to a lot, this is probably the one I've listened to the most for a number of reasons. Not just because it has a couple of my absolute favorite Arch Enemy songs, Rise of the Tyrant, Vultures, Revolution Begins are a couple of my absolute favorite songs from them, but it's also probably their strongest, most cohesive outing, specifically from Gossau. But perhaps their strongest outing of all of them. The only other one that Gossau did that I could say even comes close. Well, it's tricky because I absolutely love Anthems of Rebellion as well. That one is a extremely strong album. But then they have their album where they basically redid some of the original songs with the original singers. They did that with Gossau, and that one. It's hard for me to say that, I don't know if I'd put The Root of All Evil above Anthems of Rebellion, but it's close because Root of All Evil also has a couple songs that are, the updated version are just fantastic. So, but to me, this is arguably their strongest album with Gossau, if not their strongest album of all time, across the board. So even though she's no longer with the band, potentially, this is their best album. So even if it is a departure from their roots, it still is, to me, quintessential Arch Enemy and perhaps the best that they have come up with. So absolutely love this album. I recommend it to all of my friends because you're all my friends. So, all right, so that's my review of Rise of the Tyrant. Obviously, if I'm talking about it 9 years later, I highly recommend it. So I'd give that one 2 horns. Definitely highly recommend Rise of the Tyrant for anybody and everybody. Even if you don't like death metal, maybe you should just start listening to it. This is a good way to get you in. All right, my top 5 for the week. The songs that are kind of stuck in my head this week. The first one is a weird one. Actually, they're all weird ones. But this one, the Ex-Ambassador song, Eye of the Storm, it was featured in the trailer for the movie Deepwater Horizon, and since I saw that trailer, it's been stuck in my head. I don't really have a desire to see that movie, but the song is a good song, and it actually works really well in the trailer, but it got stuck in my head, so now there it is. Now, talking about songs that I wish weren't stuck in my head, but are, Only the Lonely by Roy Orbison. That one, for some reason, just keeps getting in there. It's a very strange thing, because it's like, I mean, it's a good song, but it's obviously, if I'm here talking about Arch Enemy, why am I talking about Roy Orbison next? It's kind of weird. Four Lords by Clutch, that's another one that just that one was weird because it popped into my head for no reason. It's one of those that just has that kind of quintessential Clutch, southern rock drawl to it, and I think that just it's attractive that way. I'm the One, which was from Ruby Volume 3, by Jeff Williams featuring Casey Lee Williams. That song just has so much energy. It's such a fun song, and it reminds me why I love that show so much. Ruby for the win. Boop. That's Ruby. Okay. I'm going to keep plugging that show on everything. And then the last one is God is in the Rain by Suicide Commando. That one is this really atmospheric, dark, aggro tech song that just has this great beat to it. Really makes me want to go to the club, so maybe I'll do that soon. But it's one of those songs that just has that good hook and just keeps on getting in your head that way. So those are my top 5 for the week. You should check them out if you have any interest in that. If not, don't. So, all right, that's my episode of Spin Cycle for this week. We'll see you again next week, and I will see you then. Bye. Hey everyone, thanks for watching this video. Be sure to keep up on all of my YouTube videos by clicking subscribe, and if you're already a subscriber, thank you, and you rock. Also visit my homepage at dkessner.com where you can find out about all my various other projects, including my written works. How about that? You can also find me at my social media handles, so drop in and say hi. And again, thank you so much for all your support. Love you.